Morning, Sharon.
Good morning, Councillor Thomas.
Well, good morning. Bore da, a croeso I cyfarfod plant a pobl ifanc yn Trefynwy. Good morning and welcome to the Children and Young People scrutiny meeting in Monmouthshire this morning. And for a change, it is a sunny morning, so we can perhaps make the most of it afterwards. I'm Tudor Thomas. I'm Chair of Children and Young People, and I will be chairing the meeting today. Before I start the meeting, I just want to welcome some of the new members, particularly David Jones, who's coming back to us after a brief absence. So croeso, David, and also Christopher Edwards, who's now County Councillor for Kingsmark in Chepstow, having replaced David Dovey. So again, welcome. I hope you enjoy the experience in CYP. I don't think I've missed anybody else. I'm not sure if Francis Taylor is joining us, but we'll see as we progress. We'll go to the agenda, and the first item on the agenda is to accept that now that I have been appointed as chair by the Labour Group. It's the chair that Labour Group has the choice of, and obviously I've been appointed to that. The second item on the agenda is to look at the issue of vice chair. So I'm asking for nominations for the position of vice chair of CYP. I hope it's a position that doesn't have to be frequently used. I don't think I missed any meetings last year, but obviously one never knows. Councillor Maureen Powell.
I'd like to nominate Louise Brown.
I'd like to second that nomination.
Okay, thank you. Before we carry on, can I ask people, if you're not speaking, to go on mute and also to switch your camera off as well, please. Otherwise, people fill the screen. So we've got a nomination from Maureen Powell, seconded by Councillor Malcolm Lane. Are there any other nominations? No. Are members of the committee who can vote, are you happy for Councillor Louise Brown to continue as vice chair?
Yes, yeah, I am, yeah.
Yes. I see a number of hands up. I think it's over 4, so obviously there are no other nominations, so that is obviously carried. So Councillor Louise Brown will obviously be vice chair of CYP. Okay. Are you happy to take that, obviously, Councillor Brown?
Oh yes, yeah, thank you. Thank you for the nomination.
Okay. That's great. Thanks then. We now go to apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
I don't have any, Chair, no.
Okay, I'm not aware of any. Is there one coming up? I think it's Will McLean giving apologies. Yes, the Chief Officer for CYP obviously giving his apologies. So thanks for that. Just come in the chat box. In terms of the next item on the agenda, any declarations of interest? No. Obviously, if something does arise, which you feel you have a conflict of interest, then obviously please raise that. Public open forum. Maureen, can you turn your camera off, please? Thanks. Public open forum. I'm not aware of anyone having said that they wish to attend or speak at this meeting this morning. So that covers the agenda item 5. We now move to the main presentation, and this is a presentation. It's the main subject on the agenda this morning. It's a presentation regarding the new curriculum for Wales, and it's a discussion with EAS, and I believe James Kent and Darren Jones, both senior officers with EAS, are going to address the meeting.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Good morning, everyone. My name's James Kent. I am Assistant Director with responsibility for curriculum support at EAS. I'll be leading you through the presentation today, and obviously, Darren's here.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Darren Jones, Principal Challenge Advisor for Monmouthshire. James will be leading the presentation, but I'll be here if there are any specific Monmouthshire questions as we go through the presentation. So it's lovely to be with you this morning.
Thanks, Darren. Okay, I'm just going to share my presentation with you, make sure that you can see it, and I'll move to full view. Okay, so what I thought I would do is to basically take you through some key aspects in terms of the curriculum framework. So first of all, I'm going to provide a brief overview, which would include just to look at the national mission, which was updated in the autumn, the key timeline in terms of what's happening and when, just as a reminder really, but then into some more detail about the key changes to the curriculum, and then also thinking about some of the wider system expectations as well. So I'll take you through all of those things, and obviously we can move to some questions then to clarify any points of understanding. So in terms of the curriculum for Wales, you'll probably be aware that this has been on the cards since 2016 now, about 5 years ago, when we had the successful Futures Review. That led to the development then of the Education in Wales, our national mission policy, which sort of set out the strategic direction for Wales between 2017 and 2021. That document was then updated in the autumn term by Welsh Government in light of an OECD review in progress towards bringing the new curriculum in. But in truth, there wasn't a huge change in terms of that policy document because it re-emphasised the importance of the 5 key enabling objectives for the curriculum for Wales, which is making sure we've got a focus on that high quality education profession, so that there's the professional learning and support for teachers in terms of their classroom practice, but also in terms of supporting and realising the curriculum. A real focus and emphasis around supporting our leaders in terms of their role and their work, again through professional learning, networking. Obviously, we've got the National Academy for Education and Leadership as well, in addition to the support provided by the region. The real emphasis around inclusion, that strong inclusive schools committed to excellence, equity and well-being, making sure that all of our learners have a strong and positive educational experience and provision to suit their needs. And then number 4 there, that robust assessment, evaluation and accountability arrangement supporting a self-improving system. So the evaluation and improvement landscape will be changing in order to be more supportive of the curriculum. So if you like, those 4 key areas are seen to be the enablers to support the curriculum as we move forward. The other thing I suppose about the Welsh Government policy is it's tried to be an integrated programme of reforms in the sense that the wider reforms are supporting the development of the curriculum. I've mentioned the 4 key drivers there, but something else that it's important to mention is the schools as learning organisations framework. And what effectively this provides for schools is a self-evaluation approach to ensure that they have a sense of where they are relative to the 7 kind of key areas of the framework. So that idea of developing a shared vision, which we know is so important, creating those continuous professional learning opportunities for all staff, so making sure they've got the training and the development needs that they require, promoting learning and collaboration among staff. With the new curriculum framework, it's important that teachers can work collaboratively with each other, but also across other schools, potentially within the cluster and perhaps in networks beyond in areas of learning. Making sure that schools have got that culture of inquiry, innovation and exploration, making sure we've got that learning from the external environment and supporting leadership. So those kind of key areas of the schools as learning organisations framework, we consider those to be the prerequisites, the important things to be in place to ensure that our teachers and our leaders are in a secure position to move forward with the framework. And I know all of the schools across the EAS region and certainly schools in Monmouthshire have participated in these schools as learning organisations surveys in order to help their self-evaluation in terms of where they think they are relative to this agenda as we move forward. Something else that was published then in autumn was the Curriculum for Wales Journey to 2022 document. This was a collaborative endeavour between Welsh Government, the regional consortia and Estyn. And what the document tries to set out is what are the kind of key stages that schools need to go through in order to be prepared to realise the curriculum from September 2022. From nursery to year 7 in the first instance. And what that document says is there's really 3 phases that schools need to go through. The first is this engagement phase, where we need to make sure that schools have thought about their vision for the curriculum and how that aligns to the 4 purposes of the curriculum, which I'll talk about briefly in a moment. Understand the model of the curriculum, which is very different from the previous national curriculum, which again I'll go through with you shortly. How they're leading the development of teaching and learning and pedagogy to support the realisation of this curriculum. Crucially, how they're making time and space for professional learning so that staff are able to gain the knowledge and skills that they need to develop this curriculum. So that's what we consider to be the engagement phase. Then there's an opportunity for designing, planning and trialling. So what does this look like in practice? Okay, trying that out and making sure that schools have the opportunity to try the different areas of learning, try a variety of different approaches to planning, be that a disciplinary approach or an interdisciplinary approach where we might align some of the subjects and areas of learning to see what does and doesn't work, and making sure that we secure then that evaluation, which is the 3rd phase from that work from our learners in terms of how they've experienced that curriculum, and obviously in terms of then the outcomes that they've achieved through doing some of that work as well. That all underpinned by that important culture of research and inquiry, because one of the things that we do know that is really important is that whatever curriculum we design and develop, it should be based around sound research and a model of inquiry, which means that we learn from what we have done and evaluate that effectively. Okay, all of that underpinned by an effective leadership of change. So it's a significant change programme in terms of the curriculum, and this document kind of sets out what that journey could look like in support of schools, really. So I mentioned earlier also there was an OECD review of the progress towards achieving the curriculum for Wales, and there were some key recommendations put forward by the OECD when they did that review. The first is that the framework should be kept under review to make sure that as schools engage with it and start to develop it for their learners, that it's coherent, that it's well designed and supports understanding, and crucially the approaches to assessment that we know support our pupils' progress. And what they also then recommended was that there should be collaborative networks so that we can share the expertise, the resources with a variety of experts across Wales. So one commitment that Welsh Government have made is that there will be national networks set up that all schools can access that will support some of those conversations, some of that professional learning and some of the resources that they need to support the realisation of the curriculum. Something else that it's worth mentioning at this stage is the current school improvement guidance was out for consultation and that actually closed back in April. But certainly one of the proposals in terms of that school improvement guidance marks a shift in terms of the way we look at evaluation and improvement. So one of the things that the document says there is for the curriculum for Wales to be successful, it's crucial that all aspects of the school system align with and support the curriculum and its underlying principles. And therefore, and I've put this in bold here, of course, and we're used to this now because this has been the situation for a little while, but local authorities and regions must not collate and aggregate school level data or create specific local arrangements to gather individual pupil level information. that information is for the school, it's for the individuals, and the focus of assessment should be around supporting our young people's progress in their learning. Okay, so that shouldn't be part of the external reporting and accountability system, but it should be there to inform school self-evaluation, and it should be evident then in school development planning in terms of what's been learned from that. Moving on then, so in terms of the timeline, where are we now? Because obviously we have had a very disrupted 18-month period. So the Curriculum for Wales was published back in January 2020, pre the pandemic. And then through the latter part of the autumn and into this spring, the curriculum has made its passage through the Senedd, and the bill was passed and achieved royal assent a few weeks ago. So that's obviously now part of the legislative landscape for us. So that means that by September 2022, the new national curriculum for Wales will be a statutory requirement for all nursery age learners up to year 7. That moves to then year 8 by 2023, year 9 by 2024, and then by September 2025, the year 10 pupils will have access to the new Key Stage 4 qualifications, the new qualifications which will be aligned to this continuum of learning that's been developed through the Curriculum for Wales. The idea obviously of staggering this is that so those pupils have a consistent experience through their educational lives to the point where they arrive at year 10 in September 2025. And just to point out as well, because I think I certainly know that you'll be interested in this, and it's important because the Curriculum for Wales framework is a curriculum from 3 to 16. And obviously in the 14 to 16 age bracket is where our learners study for their qualifications. So currently, and I apologise for the size of the text on the right hand side of the slide here, but currently Qualifications Wales, who are the qualifications regulator, are going through a 3-phase consultation process around future qualifications. The first of those consultations was conducted last year, and that was basically around what the general principles for our future qualifications should be. And the 4 bullet points on the slide there outline what the key outcomes were. Firstly, that the qualifications should be linked to and support the curriculum. I think there's previously been a concern that the qualifications don't really align very well to the curriculum that was available at Key Stage 3, for example. All qualifications should be available bilingually. That should be an expectation, and that hasn't always been the case for learners. That the qualifications should be coherent and inclusive, therefore meet the needs of all of the learners who are in school. And the 4th point there is that the GCSE name and brand should be retained, even though the content and assessment arrangements will have to change. Certainly, one of the things that Qualifications Wales mentioned through the process was that they felt there was sufficient flexibility within the GCSE brand to ensure that we could retain those qualifications, because they are clearly recognised and understood by the wider system, but there is sufficient flexibility for us to change those to better reflect the curriculum framework. Okay, now the second stage of that consultation, which closed in April, was around the subjects that should be part of that qualifications offer. And then the third consultation, which will take place later this year, will be around the detailed design features and content of new or updated qualifications. So there's a lot of activity that's currently going on around this space, and I put a link on the slide there. Stakeholders are certainly encouraged to feedback as this consultation process moves forward. And one of the things we're doing is we've facilitated opportunities for schools to engage with those consultations alongside Qualifications Wales. So in terms of consultation 2, then the range of qualifications, I won't go through this in huge detail, but the slides are there, the information's there for you if you want to see what was put out for consultation. So Certainly review and reform of every GCSE that's currently offered is something that's going to have to be looked at in light of the new curriculum framework. So you'll see that across all GCSE subjects. The proposal potentially, for example, to add some new GCSEs, for example, around social studies and the humanities, modifications to the qualifications in English and maths as well. So if we look on the next slide, for example, you will see that we're looking at a combined GCSE in maths and numeracy, where currently learners potentially do both qualifications, and that would be an equivalent to 1.5 GCSEs as opposed to 2 GCSEs. It's felt that we could combine the GCSE qualifications so that the skills of both papers can be assessed in less time in terms of the curriculum, with some additional numerical proficiency assessments that young people could take. And then in terms of English, it was again reducing from 2 to 1.5 GCSEs, but there's still the opportunity to study both literature and language as part of that qualification. And then in science and technology, the proposal was to move to a combined 2 GCSE double award in science and technology, with some additional qualifications then for those pupils who wanted greater choice. The Skills Challenge Certificate would be reformed and made simpler and assess the new integral skills within the curriculum. Okay, so like I say, I'm not going to go through that in a lot more detail. Happy to pick up questions about that afterwards, but that was the broad gist of the of that second part of the consultation. So the third part of the consultation now will consider the content and assessment of individual qualifications. Okay, so what I'm going to move on to next is to look at what the changes to the curriculum are. So in the first instance, I suppose the biggest change is we're moving from a focus on content and outcomes, where content and outcomes are stated through the curriculum documents, which they currently are in the existing curriculum, to a curriculum that's led largely by these 4 purposes. And these 4 purposes taken together are what we want our young people to be like, and the kind of knowledge and skills and experiences we want them to have by the time that they leave school. And it's a much broader definition than the current content and outcomes that are within the current curriculum documentation. And I suppose the other big change there is that it's one continuum of learning from 3 to 16. So rather than having distinct phases and key stages, real effort has been made within this curriculum framework to make this a smoother continuum from early years through to 16. And in terms of how we might define the curriculum, I think this is important because this comes through the guidance as well. Schools curriculum is everything a learner experiences in pursuit of the 4 purposes. So this is how it's been framed in the new guidance. It is not simply what we teach. So it's not just the content, but it's how we teach it. So the range of strategies and techniques we use and the way we plan for those, and also why we teach it. And I think we should always be able to answer the question of purpose in the curriculum. Why are we teaching this aspect of this curriculum in this area of learning? Or why are we combining these areas of learning to deepen our learners' understanding of a particular issue? So that's the definition. And then again, apologies for the small nature. It's very hard to get the full purposes onto one slide, actually. But I think my point here is quite often when people talk about the 4 purposes of the curriculum, they talk about the bits in bold. So ambitious, capable learners, for example, who are ready to learn throughout their lives. But actually, what schools need to consider in developing their curriculum is all of those individual bullet points that sit beneath those 4 purposes. Okay, so for example, if we have ethical and informed citizens, they should be able to understand and exercise their human and democratic rights and responsibilities, understand and consider the impact of their actions when making choices and acting. Okay, so those purposes are quite broad, but what they do is they define what we want our young people to be, the experiences we want them to have, and the way we'd like them to see them behave, I guess, as they move through their school experience. Okay. Now, The other important point here is that schools have the responsibility for designing their own curriculum within the framework guidance. In terms of other key considerations, so in terms of the curriculum, we've talked about the 4 purposes being the key driver and certainly needing to be something that every teacher and leader needs to think about in designing their curriculum framework. But there are some other what we would call here cross-cutting elements. So these are elements that should be present across the curriculum in each area of learning. So the first one of these is the UNCRC, the UN Convention for the Rights of the Child. We've got a big focus around diversity, and that covers a wide range of areas in terms of gender and sexuality, and Black, Asian and minority ethnic contributions. So a broad range of areas there that schools will need to be considering in designing their curriculum. You've then got relationships and sexuality education, for which some recent additional guidance has been provided for schools. You've got careers and work-related experiences as well, and how they should be embedded within areas of learning. And again, there's been some additional guidance published for schools in the last week for consultation, but also then local, national and global contexts for the areas that the young people are studying. So those are the kind of cross-cutting elements that should be in place across the curriculum, regardless of the area of learning in which you are studying, but obviously where it's most appropriate. So we would expect, for example, perhaps a greater focus in aspects of diversity in health and well-being, or in humanities, for example, but it's important to have that consideration also in science and in maths and in other areas. So in terms of the key changes, so you may well be aware that from the 13 traditional national curriculum subjects, we now have 6 more integrated areas of learning and experience: expressive arts, health, well-being, humanities, LLC, maths and numeracy, and science and technology. Okay. But within those areas of learning, we still have the traditional disciplines. So in expressive arts, you would have art, music and drama, for example. But in addition to that, we now have dance, film and digital media, okay, to reflect, I suppose, the fact that we are moving forward with this curriculum, and we need to ensure that the curriculum is up to date and provides the knowledge and skills that young people need. Business and social studies, for example, has been added to humanities in addition to traditional subjects of history, geography, and RE, which is now RVE, which I'll talk about a bit briefly later on. You've then got international languages, which is kind of the new name for modern foreign languages, but again, reflecting the fact that those international languages are much broader in scope, potentially, depending on the locality of our young people, where they live. And then computer science, which has been added to science and technology. We also still have the cross-curricular skills of literacy, numeracy and digital competence. They are mandatory in the framework, but the literacy and numeracy frameworks are now what's known as non-statutory guidance. So schools need to make sure they're delivering on literacy, numeracy and digital competence, but the frameworks have become optional. I would imagine that most schools will still be using those, though, to support their curriculum design. So we've talked about the areas of learning. We've talked about some of the cross-cutting themes and the purposes of education. Each area of learning and experience then has what we are calling statements of what matters. And what these do, broadly, is they kind of frame the key concepts or the big ideas in each area of learning and experience. Okay, now all I've captured here is the strap line at the top, but underneath each of these statements is a rationale that sets out more detail about those concepts, those ideas and those experiences that young people should have. The example on the screen here comes from the humanities area of learning and experience. So for example, at the top there, you can see that inquiry, exploration and investigation is important to inspire curiosity about the world, its past, present and future. And interestingly, inquiry might look different in history to how it looks in geography or social studies. So there will still be nuances, even though this is has been designed as a more of a integrated curriculum framework. Okay, but each of these statements, sets out the key concepts, the key ideas that our young people need to be studying. They've now been set out in a mandatory code as well that's gone out for consultation, and that means that it's an expectation that schools use the statements of what matters to support the design of their curriculum. Something else that's a key change in terms of the curriculum is the way that we think about learner progress. And what's been defined in the curriculum are what we call the 5 principles of progression. Okay. Now, what we talk about in terms of progression is how do we support our learners to develop their understanding, develop their skills as they move through the curriculum. And we're thinking about this in 5 ways in the new curriculum for Wales. Okay, firstly is to increase their breadth and depth of knowledge in each of the areas of learning. The second is to think about how we deepen their understanding of ideas and disciplines within the areas. So as I've mentioned, this framework has put a number of subjects together, but it's still important that, for example, our young people have a good disciplinary understanding of physics or biology in the science and technology area. Okay. The next thing there is the refinement and growing sophistication in the use and application of skills. So as our pupils move through the 3 to 16 continuum, we would expect the application and use of skills to deepen and become more sophisticated through time. The next thing is their ability to make connections and transfer learning into new contexts. That might be across subject areas. It might be across areas of learning and experience. Might be able to apply our thinking in science and maths to the work that we do in humanities, or vice versa. Okay. And then the last one is this idea of increasing effectiveness as a learner. And that is about how can we support our young people to develop their independence, and some of those learning skills that we know are so important for them to develop as they move through the framework. So those are the 5 ways that we are looking at our learners improving as they move through the curriculum framework. And in maths, they've looked at this in a slightly different way, even though those principles still apply. Because in maths we have the proficiencies, and these are conceptual understanding, communicating with symbols, using symbols, fluency, logical reasoning, and strategic competence, which is a sequence that learners go through to develop their mathematical understanding. Okay, so that's the way that we are framing progress through the curriculum, which is probably broader than we have previously, where we've looked at it quite often from a subject perspective outside of the foundation phase. And this is another thing that I wanted to just talk about briefly. Just because the framework has been designed in a way that is more integrated, it doesn't mean that schools have to use one model for the way that they develop their curriculum. So the quote there comes directly from the guidance, and it says that the curriculum for Wales Guidance promotes collaboration and cross-disciplinary learning within and across areas. This will enable learners to build connections across their learning and combine different experiences, knowledge and skills. But there's a continuum that schools might look at when they design their curriculum. So some schools might say, well, actually, we are broadly going to have a disciplinary curriculum. So we're still going to teach through individual subjects, maybe in the secondary phase. Others might say, well, actually, we're going to look at a multidisciplinary approach where within an area of learning, for example, we're going to ask our RE specialist geography, history to work together around kind of common themes or common concepts, but still teach within a disciplinary way. Then there's an interdisciplinary model where schools might say, well, OK, let's get the science department and the geography department in a secondary phase to work together to think about climate change and some of the challenges around some of the big environmental issues. And then there's an entirely integrated approach where we might try and combine a number of areas of learning around a particular theme or a particular approach. So it's a continuum. And what I would certainly say in terms of the way this curriculum looks is there's probably going to be a combination of models that are going to be in use. So it might be that it's most appropriate to teach mathematics broadly in a disciplinary way. That doesn't mean we don't want to use some of those mathematical ideas in other subject areas, but it might be best to be taught in a disciplinary way before it's then applied elsewhere. Likewise, I can't see some of the big issues of our day being discussed without looking at the contributions from different disciplines. Okay, it's hard to imagine thinking about something like climate change without considering ethics and philosophy, but also science and technology and geography. So I think there'll be a variety of models that schools will use at different times. And the other key thing is we're moving away from the system that we previously had in terms of level descriptors to these descriptions of learning. Okay. And broadly, what these descriptions of learning do is they describe the progress that our learners make within the areas of learning and experience across that 2 to 3 year period, those progression steps. And just so that you've got a point of reference, in terms of progression step 1, we're looking at 3 to 5 year olds. In terms of progression steps 2, 5 to 8. Progression step 3 is 8 to 11. Progression step 4 is 11 to 14 year olds, and then progression step 5 is broadly equivalent to 14 to 16 year olds. But of course, what we do know about learning and progression is, learners in any class will be varied in terms of where they are at any moment in time for a variety of reasons. So hence the continuum of learning. In terms of progression step 3, I've just picked one of the statements out for you so you can see what they look like. So in terms of these descriptions of learning, you can see here one that I've picked from progression step 3 in science and technology. So this would be for your upper primary aged children. And what it says is I can identify the threats to the development and health of organisms and recognise some natural defences, preventions and treatments. And what we're trying to get schools to move away from in terms of this framework is thinking, OK, I can do a single piece of work on this and then assess it. Because actually, if you look at in depth at that statement, there's quite a lot going on in terms of the learning that you might need to do in order to achieve it. OK, so for example, if you look at organisms, well, there's plants and animal species, aren't there? And they live in different types of environments, okay? And the natural defences that plants and animals might have might be different, okay? And then there are a variety of different preventions and treatments. So actually, it would be impossible to assess this just on the basis of one unit of work or one lesson or one sequence, okay? This is something that needs to be developed over time. And what schools' role is to look at these descriptions of learning and say, well, OK, what does that look like in terms of my class, in terms of my learners, in terms of how I can support their progression and understanding, so they've got a secure understanding of this as they move through the progression steps. So all the assessment information should then feed into how do I support my learners to improve as they move their way through the framework. OK, so that's kind of one of the key ways in which assessment is changing. Much stronger emphasis around what we call formative assessment, how we can support our learners to improve, than perhaps we've had previously, and less emphasis. Not that summative assessment isn't important. Of course it is. It's important to know where our learners are at a given point in time. But the key role of assessment is to support learning and progress. In terms of then the key changes in assessment, the Welsh Government, obviously through their assessment guidance, have set out key principles of assessment. OK, and the one at the top there, which is in a slightly darker shade, the purpose of assessment is to support the progress of each individual learner in relation to the 3 to 16 continuum. So that is its purpose. That is why we assess and how assessment information should be used. And you can see then that there are a range of other considerations in terms of assessment as well. I think an interesting one is the third one down the right, which is assessment is an ongoing process, which is indistinguishable from learning and teaching, because as we are learning and with our young people and as we are teaching them, we are finding out, well, what do they already know? How can I support them in developing that understanding and moving them on, deepening their understanding relative to those 5 principles of progression. In terms of the purpose of assessment then, Welsh Government in the guidance define it in these ways. So firstly, supporting individual learners on an ongoing day-to-day basis. Secondly, identifying, capturing and reflecting on individual learner progress over time. And then thirdly, understanding group progress in order to reflect on practice. And one of the things that the guidance does say is that schools will have to work with their cluster and with in a case of secondary schools, at least one other school in terms of moderate, it's not called a moderation process, but it's making sure that they've got a secure understanding of the assessment and the progress that learners are making, but also to share their practices so that they can improve through time. Okay, so the focus of the conversation isn't about trying to generate a number or an outcome. It's about talking about the process and making sure that that approach to assessment improves through time to ensure that learners can make greater progress. And then the other thing that's set out in the curriculum framework are these, which are the pedagogical principles. So these are were set out originally in Successful Futures. There's 12 of them. And what Welsh Government have said through their framework is these should be in evidence as learner experiences develop through the curriculum. Okay, so these 12 aspects of teaching should be part of that framework. So, for example, it says here, create authentic contexts for learning. Now, we can't always create an authentic context for learning, potentially, but what that's kind of says is, well, okay, how could I apply the learning in the classroom to the world of work, for example? So it may be a careers link in there in terms of creating that authenticity to the learning activity. Crucially, this framework is very clear about the role of social and emotional development and positive relationships and developing that, not just as part of your PSE curriculum, but obviously we have the health and well-being area of learning experience, but also how we encourage and support emotional development in every lesson that our learners study. Okay, so a range of different ideas there. Not going to go through all of them, but I hope you get the sense of what they're there for. And then just last here, let's talk through the expectations of the wider system. So as I mentioned right at the start of the presentation, Welsh Government, Estyn and ourselves with the other regions have looked at what that journey could look like. And whilst I say this is expectations, this is just a suggestion for how schools can get to a starting point. And we know that our schools are potentially on slightly different journeys with the curriculum framework at the moment, how we can get them from the engagement phase through the designing, planning and trialling phase, and then through that evaluation phase that I talked about earlier. And what that document does do is it sets that out in more detail. Okay, so in terms of the engagement phase, just for example, building an understanding of the curriculum model and approach to assessment set out in the guidance. It's important that our staff have a really good understanding of the framework before they start to design, plan and trial and then evaluate. Okay, I'm nearly there. So this is, I think, the penultimate slide. I thought it would be helpful to make you aware that currently there are a number of live consultations that Welsh Government have published in the last week, actually, around some additional guidance. So firstly, there's guidance around curriculum, around careers and work-related experiences, which has gone live, as I said, in the last week. And what that guidance does is it sort of suggest to schools how they should be thinking about planning for careers and work-related experiences in the curriculum. Okay, and the questions are asking them, is that helpful? You've got the enabling pathways guidance there as well. That's for learners who are leading up to progression step 1. Then you've got the guidance on the design and delivery of mandatory RVE, religion, values and ethics. Okay. And that talks about the legislative guidance in terms of what schools of varying characteristics and local authorities are required to do by law, how religion, values and ethics is part of the humanities area of learning, and then provide some other guidance as to how schools can make sure that that is effectively integrated into the humanities. The curriculum for non-maintained nursery settings, so there is a curriculum that's been developed for that sector, and that's out for consultation. The statement of what matters code and the draft progression code basically set out what I've described earlier in terms of how those aspects of the curriculum work, but also that they become mandatory. Therefore, schools have to use them in developing their curriculum. And then also then guidance around the code for relationships and sexuality education as well. And what's been done there is some supplementary guidance to look at, for example, the content that should be introduced at appropriate periods in a learner's development, because I know that was something that had caused some concern across the system. Okay, so that is that's my presentation and my update. Happy now to take questions, Chair.
Right, thank you. Well, Darren, sorry, James.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for an extremely comprehensive presentation. I think my brain is still reeling, actually, from trying to absorb all of that. But thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr. We'll now go to questions and comments. The one thing that I would say is obviously it is a fairly monumental change in the curriculum, and obviously starting way back in 2016, and it's now coming to fruition in 2022. But it will be a big change. I know that most schools that I'm familiar with, and I'm on one governing body, that they are already on, well on that path to making and effecting that change. But undoubtedly it will be challenging. But obviously as well, schools will welcome the support that EAS offer in terms of on an individual school basis, but also on a cluster basis, and of schools sharing and pooling, as they always have done, really, good practice. So I think that is crucially important. I'll turn now then to our membership, and can't see any hands up at the moment, but are there any questions or comments that members would make? I can see one hand up, Peter Edwards, to start. Peter, do you want to come in?
I'm assuming you mean Christopher Edwards, Chair.
Sorry, Christopher,
Okay.
sorry.
I could change my name for you if you like.
Yeah.
First of all, can I just say thank you for your warm welcome earlier to what is my first meeting of this committee, and thanks as well to James and Darren. It's a very useful presentation, particularly as I'm also a school governor as well. My question, I don't quite know whether it will go to EAS or MCC officers present, but obviously we all appreciate that teachers and school staff have been working hard to ensure continuity of learning during this pandemic, and have done an absolutely amazing job while having to adapt in most cases to a different way of teaching. From September last year, schools are meant to have had a full year of developing these changes necessary for this new curriculum to start in September next year. And I can see from your presentation in the last section that there are 3 steps set against suggested timescales that schools should be taking on this journey to September next year. And I was just wondering, where are Monmouthshire schools in relation to these steps, and how are we actually supporting these struggling schools, if there are any struggling schools?
Yeah. Happy for me to make a start on that one, Darren? Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good question, Councillor Edwards, to be fair. And what obviously we've spoken to schools, a number of schools over the last sort of 5 to 6 months in terms of distance and blended learning. And one of the things that we're finding is, in terms of preparedness, there's probably a continuum, and I think certainly that some schools are in a very strong position because they've done quite a lot pre the pandemic in terms of the development of their curriculum, and then there are others who will require some additional support as we move forward. In terms of the Journey to 2022 document, I should mention that is something that we're currently talking to Welsh Government and Estyn about at the moment, because what we want to make sure is that schools that aren't rushing because they feel there is that time scale, it's important that this is done properly. It's important because we know that curriculum design development is takes years to get right. And the one thing that we wouldn't want to happen is for there to be unintended consequences about not getting that engagement piece right. Okay, so it's about how that's framed, I think, is really important, and making sure that schools feel supported, because it is important that every member of staff in school does have that opportunity for engagement, does understand the key aspects of the curriculum framework, and then has time to trial and develop. Certainly, I think that's something that's very live in discussion, certainly in the meetings that I have with Welsh Government in Estyn around that issue. Darren, I don't know if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think there's two aspects. First of all, I think every school is in a slightly different position before the pandemic, and schools have developed over the pandemic according to individual circumstances. I know certainly in some schools where they've been severely impacted by the COVID and have had bubbles of pupils away for significant parts of the year, whereby other schools may not have had such severe impact. But I think there's been lots of positives over this time as well. Certainly the way professional learning is now delivered through virtual provision has certainly enabled more schools and more practitioners to take part in the engagement sessions, the professional learning. So that's a real positive. The fact that it's now recorded, very much like this session as well, means that schools can access that professional learning at a time convenient to them, and to even watch it 2 or 3 times. So certainly that has been a real step forward. I think over this time as well, I know James, I know Councillor Edwards touched upon it, with regards focus on pedagogy. I think over this time, going back 15, 16 months, no one knew what distance or blended learning was going to look like. And as a result of that, within schools, there's been a huge focus on pedagogy. And certainly, as a head teacher and a practitioner myself previously, perhaps a focus on pedagogy, which I perhaps didn't experience myself in the normal operation. So as a result of that, there's been much more collaboration within school, within networks, whether that be professional learning networks. So I certainly think schools have developed new skills and knowledge and understanding as a result of the pandemic. That doesn't mean the pandemic has had an impact on that timeline, because in some schools it is going to have an impact. But there are some schools who've been able to take these positives and move perhaps faster than they would have if perhaps there hadn't been the pandemic. So certainly there have been challenges and there have been disruption, but some schools have been able to take the positives out of what has been a very, very challenging situation for schools and move forward at a slightly fast pace. That doesn't mean every school, and certainly for those schools who have been unable to move forward at such a fast pace, there will be support there. There will be the framework around them to enable them to continue their progression at their own pace, but with a bespoke support for that particular school to enable them to make that to implement the curriculum for their learners. Sharon, I know you've come on screen. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add there.
Thanks, Darren. Yes, really to reinforce everything that both James and Darren has already shared with you. Certainly our schools have moved a long way, some more than others because they were on at a different part of the journey pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. But I've seen a huge increase in the amount of collaboration and the different range of strategies that they're using and deploying. Clearly, as we go forward, 2022 doesn't sound that far away, but we will continue to work closely with our schools, having the bespoke support they need in order to make the journey. But I took very much what James was saying and agree completely. It takes time to build a curriculum, and it takes time to embed it, and it is more important to get it right. So, we'll continue to work with our schools, but we'll continue also to understand the context in which they're working in order to make sure that they're moving along that journey as quickly as they can, but reasonably, in order to do the job right and to do it really well for our children.
Sorry, could I just add, because I didn't pick up Councillor Edwards' point around school support in terms of what's available, and I think what I'd try and provide some reassurance there. So schools will have support from their school improvement partner or their school-to-school link. We've provided some school development planning guidance just to help with strategic planning over the next year. We've got a national professional learning programme for senior leaders, for head teachers and for middle leaders, which we have made available both live and in person, but also asynchronously, as Darren was mentioning, so people can access it when they need to access it as they would like. We'll have some professional learning support for HLTAs and TAs as well as part of our offer. We've got a secondary curriculum design network to support our secondary deputy heads who are looking at this from a kind of secondary school perspective. We've got our area learning and subject networks who are looking at kind of planning within and across areas of learning. And of course, if schools require bespoke support, we will be able to provide that as well. So I think in terms of support, there's plenty of support there. And I agree with Sharon. We want to get this right. We want to move at the right pace. I mean, yes, obviously we got to commit to the timeline, but we need to get it right.
Okay. Thanks all for that. Move now then. Next hand up, Peter Strong.
Hi. For those who don't know me, I'm Pete Strong. I'm a co-opted member representing the National Education Union. Just to pick up on the points that have been made just now, I did a quick sort of ask around, and I do find there is a genuine enthusiasm amongst teachers for the new curriculum, particularly the principles of the new curriculum, and particularly I think more in the primary schools, a real desire to get it going, and they've had a great many inset days and so on it. But of course that has to be balanced against the size of the challenge, the workload implications for an already exhausted workforce for reasons that you know me too well. So yeah, so I think the important thing is that when it comes in, it won't be signed, sealed and delivered as perfect, and it'll be really important that people like EAS, Eston and so on, when they come in to look at schools, they do not take an approach of saying, well, you're not doing that, yeah, because schools won't be doing all of it from the very beginning, even though they might be meant to. It will take time to, as you say, embed it, and they will need that supportive approach. I have a number of questions, but I can find myself to one for the moment. Would you agree that in many ways this challenge is going to be more difficult for secondary schools than for primary schools, in that primary schools are much more used to working in a cross-curricular way, whereas secondary schools are notoriously of this sort of tyranny of the timetable that does make it difficult and not impossible, of course, but difficult to have that genuinely cross-curricular approach. You might better do it for part of the year, but if you're stuck within your timetable slot, there's limits to what you can do. And also, would you agree there are actually pitfalls that need to be avoided in a cross-curricular approach, in that, for example, history teachers might be, or hopefully are, very passionate about history and know a great deal about it, but they might not know a great deal about geography. And therefore you've got problems that either, if you leave it to the teachers to deal with it, they will concentrate excessively on what they know about and are comfortable with, or you have a more sort of strong, a very, very centralized sort of approach where it's all handed down to the teacher. You will teach exactly this, and you get back almost to that syndrome of the teacher just being a page ahead of the kids in the textbook sort of thing, which is not a good approach. So would you feel that those are real dangers that need to be worked upon?
Shall I start this the response? Are you happy? Thanks for your question. I think that it's going to be challenging for secondary schools. Of course it is. We talk about timetable. I think one of the anxieties always for secondary schools is around what qualifications will look like 14 to 16 as well. That's often used as a sort of a bit of a kind of a we need to look at that and work our model back. But I think what this curriculum doesn't dictate is the model that schools use to deliver their curriculum. So in the presentation there, I talked about that continuum of approaches. Do we want our specialists teaching in their specialisms? Yeah, we absolutely do want our specialists teaching in their specialism. Now, there are different models and approaches you could take. Now, the example I used in expressive arts, art subjects are highly specialised, aren't they? You want your arts teacher teaching the art bit of a curriculum, but it might be you have a common theme or a common set of creative processes that the department are working on at any given time. And I know there's a school in Monmouthshire trialing this approach at the moment. But what you then do is you still have those teachers teaching within that discipline. So it almost becomes what we call a multidisciplinary approach. So links and connections are made, or it might be a common theme that they're looking at across the curriculum. So those links and connections are made, but teachers are still teaching within their specialism. So I think this is about how we think about curriculum design. And I think actually what we need to do is think about curriculum design before timetabling. But I appreciate that that's challenging because of the number of hours that we need to allocate for GCSE and for Key Stage 3 and so on. So for me, it's about, and that's why trialling is important. That's why that second phase is really important. Let's allow departments that time to think about how that trialling can work, try a variety of different approaches, evaluate them, get that pupil voice crucially, what was the learner's experience, look at their progress in terms of their skills development in those areas, or if it's more of a knowledge-rich subject, their knowledge. So I think it's about how we design it, not necessarily about asking teachers to teach out of specialism. And then if we look at other areas, so cross-curricular themes like I mentioned climate change, that's largely because I'm an academic geographer and I've got a particular interest. But in terms of an area like that, I cannot imagine how you could get a really good rounded understanding of that without involving your science teachers, without involving your well-being, because we've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, haven't we? We've got the impact on society and communities and humanity. So it's, I think it's about looking at the curriculum and making those decisions on the basis of what's best for learning, but certainly not about asking people to teach largely out of specialism. Just, at times people may have to do that to make those links and connections. But, I agree with Professor Mick Waters, who often says that your specialism is your gift that you bring to your teaching, isn't it? And that passion as well. So for me, it's about the planning, not necessarily about integrating it. But it will certainly be a shift for secondaries. I think that there is a challenge there, certainly, for them. Sorry, yeah, Darren.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I really take the point about it is going to be a challenge, but I think with that increased challenge, there will be that sort of increased support as well available for schools. And certainly it's about knowing the schools well as well, to make sure that that support fits the school as well. And so that's going to be really important though during this term and going into the next term, when relatively normal school operation, to be able to really get to know those schools well and where they exactly are. I also think it's going to be helpful going forward, the reduction in that high stakes accountability, which schools have been subject to previously. And it does give them a little bit more ability to be able to experiment and to trial things, because that high stakes accountability, which has been part of that system previously, is no longer going to be there. I think schools are going to appreciate that. And then going to the teaching within schools as well, and certainly in secondary schools, I take it is going to be more challenging for secondary schools, but as James has already alluded to, I think it's going to be an exciting opportunity to really think again about what those children, and I think going back to the presentation, but why we are teaching something. I think certainly in many cases we're teaching something because of the wrong reasons, and so certainly it's that opportunity to really make those links in that learning and make it an exciting curriculum for our young people, to really, so they engage in that learning and really apply that learning across a larger field, really. So certainly I think there are some exciting opportunities coming, but I take your point that it will be some challenge, and certainly within those departments I can imagine in some schools that they are perhaps thinking it is going to be a difficult, but at the same time schools have had quite a long running to the process, and so certainly those thoughts have been ongoing for a number of years as well. Sharon, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add.
Very little, thanks James and Darren. Just to say that I know that our schools are very enthusiastic. When they've presented to members about blended learning, they've looked at those range of skills and also cross-curricular themes. I think when they've been offering a blended learning offer to students, they've needed to be in contact with colleagues in other departments in order to maximise the impact of that kind of offer and that blended learning. And certainly we can see when we work with schools now that they're thinking about how they're reorganising their schools in order to support and facilitate a different approach to learning and a different kind of way of thinking about what they learn and what really matters to the learners. So yes, it will be more of a challenge in secondary school, but I think, you know, I can see from conversations with our schools, they're ready for the challenge and they're, you know, enthusiastic and preparing. And obviously they'll have access to all the support they need in order to achieve that.
Okay, well, thanks all for that, that response. We move now then to Councillor Maureen Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. It's more of a comment than a question, but I want to thank you all, and particularly James, for such a wonderful presentation. I had seen about this before, but it was put out so plainly and made such a lot of sense. My way of thinking is years ago, you had subjects in little compartments. You had history there, maths there, and English there. But life isn't like that. And this integrated type of learning and giving an overall education so that it covers everything, because how many children at the age of 11 know exactly what they're going to do when they leave? They don't. There's a one or two that are dedicated and perhaps set the heart on something, but most of them don't really know. So that having an integrated overall education which works in together from all the subjects together gives them a much better, wider look at education and what their future can be. And I'm looking for it in, you know, really enthusiastic about it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Powell. We move now then to Councillor Louise Brown.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation, which was very interesting. I noticed at the end of the presentation you did a list of the current consultations. Is it possible to be sent a link to those? Because, you know, you can actually Google and find them, but it does take quite some time to go through and find the absolute one, you know, because sometimes you get the consultation document, but not the whole consultation if you do that sort of thing. So if the committee could be sent that would be very helpful. I think it's probably following on from what Peter Strong was saying. I think the concern is with regard to the timetable, you know, because specifically because of this pandemic and because of the need for all this big need to catch up, you know, on top of a new curriculum, which can be, and you know, I hope the timetable is going to be very flexible in relation to that particular issue. A question I've got was related to, I did ask in the last EAS presentation, and I was told that you were the best person to answer this. My interest is, you know, particularly in Sakri and the religious education side, and you know, it was really to ensure that the professional learning resources for each particular subject area had the same resources available, and you know, there wasn't more emphasis on one than the other. The other thing I did find interesting in your presentation was that the flexibility with regard to the different models, you know, going from disciplinary to fully integrated, and it seemed as if the schools themselves had a lot of scope to you know, do what they felt was best. And I think in the Act there was quite a lot of emphasis on the head teacher and their design of the curriculum. And you know, it's interesting to see how that would actually work, because if you're sharing professional practice and somebody's approaching things from a different perspective, then obviously one model for one school wouldn't necessarily do as well in another school. The last question I've got is probably more to do with you know, having gone through an education system where it's very subject based. I think one of the concerns I've got is that if schools are self-assessing and it's based upon an individual learner's progress, which it seems to be, you know, will there still be the PISA standard tests to do with literacy and numeracy, which is an international one, to see how pupils are doing on basic skills? And I'm not quite sure what the skills certificate would cover, and I noticed that was quite an interesting thing. I hope I haven't asked too many questions, but I suppose the last one I was...
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's good. If, you know, we have said we'd limit it to 2 questions, but can you just, because I've lost the thread there a little bit. I don't know about the presenters, but can you just, Councillor Brown, just state the 2 questions you want to ask now, just fairly succinctly, so that we can actually, you know what's going to be answered, please.
well, I think the first question is to do with the flexibility, both of the curriculum itself and also the flexibility of the timescale in which to do it. That's one question. The second question is to ensure that each of the subject areas have, you know, the same professional learning resources. And I think the third, if I'm allowed a third question, it's about
over to James and Sharon, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Brown, for your questions as well. Okay, so in terms of flexibility of timescales, now, one of the things that Welsh Government are looking to be doing over the summer is to sort of ask schools in terms of preparedness to support any kind of decision about the curriculum. But certainly at the moment, our understanding and expectation is that the curriculum will still proceed from September 2022. But what I would reassure Councillor Brown and the rest of the group this morning is that Welsh Government and SD and ourselves are listening. We are, you know, I regularly feedback. In fact, this afternoon, I'll be feeding back to Welsh Government in terms of feedback we've picked up around this, in terms of anxieties around timescales and expectations. There needs to be flexibility because we have to get this right. OK, so that commitment has to be there from all partners, because, as we've said, curriculum design and development is an iterative process. It takes years to get right. And the one thing we absolutely need in this, as you said, the role, you know, the role of the head teacher is stated in the Act, and you know, and the role of teachers in developing that. People need confidence to do that. So that also links to the second question and about professional learning, access to resources and access to support. Absolutely, there will be support across all areas of learning and experience, and the disciplinary areas that feed those areas of learning and experience. There has to be, in order to support our teachers to do the best job they can. And in terms of that separate, this idea of schools having to work on this all independently, there'll be plenty of network and working opportunities to share practice that we will facilitate, and that will help schools to make links and connections so they can see other models in practice, they can work with their practitioners, and we can provide some guidance, because the one thing we absolutely wouldn't want schools to think is they have to do all of this by themselves. There's a support network out there for them. And I will just respond to the last one, which is around PISA. Yeah, my understanding is we will continue unless the Minister decides otherwise. So those PISA tests would those international tests will continue. And in fact, it was the reason, our performance in PISA, as to why the new curriculum and reforms were introduced in the first place. So that's a response to the questions. I don't know if Darren and Sharon want to.
Yeah, I mean, I know Councillor Brown has sort of expressed a concern with regards the perhaps as an example, religious education losing its focus in schools, and with regard to the role she plays with SACRA. But certainly I think within schools, as part of that planning, and also they'll be looking at auditing those subject areas as part of that designing of the curriculum, and also the coverage of the skills and those what's matter statements. So as part of that planning of the new curriculum, those processes will be completed by schools. And as they go through that trialing of the curriculum, they'll be reviewing that and auditing the coverage as well as they go through there. So certainly I don't think subjects are going to be lost. I don't think skills are going to be lost. I think those skills and those subjects will be taught in a more exciting and more multidisciplinary approach, which I think is going to really make those links for learners, make it more meaningful and authentic going forward.
Sharon, do you want? Sorry.
I think James and Darren have covered those questions very well, so I have nothing further to add on that one. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your
Thank
comprehensive answers. We move now then to Councillor Maggie Harris.
Hi, I haven't got my picture, I'll just use my voice. Thank you both for tremendous presentations. I've listened to several now. I've heard James before, and every time I realise that I learn a little bit more. It is a quantum of information to get into anybody's head, and I commend the curriculum itself. I think it's exciting. The potential is absolutely wonderful. I'm just glad I'm not a head teacher, even more glad I'm not a class teacher. But from a governor point of view, we had a presentation at our school only this week, and we have a lead, one of the senior leadership team has taken the lead on this and had a presentation. And finally, the thing that's coming up for the government is not that we can't quite understand what's happening because we've got to look at it. Of course, my question is, how are we actually going to assess where our school is? Because we used to have standards and tuck-ins, but now we're not going to have that kind of standards and tuck-ins. So how will governors assess where their schools are?
I don't know. I think we've lost Councillor Harris. I don't know about the presenters, but I found great difficulty in hearing what she was saying. I think the key question that came out at the end was, where are schools going to, where are they going to be assessed, where they are in that sort of continuum. I think that was the question. I missed the earlier part. I would ask people now to go more to questions rather than longer comments, to be honest. But it's very difficult to hear you, Councillor Harris. We couldn't. I struggled. So do you want to answer that question about how will schools know where they are on this on the sort of trajectory of progress?
Yeah, happy to do that. Assessment will continue. Okay, and I think the emphasis of this curriculum, as I think I said during the presentation, is around that formative development. So any inference we make about progress is either formative or summative, isn't it? So summative would be, I've got to the end of this period, how have I done across that whole unit of work or in this subject at that moment in time? We'll still have to arrive at that in terms of progress, but the focus and emphasis, but again, crucially, that information is for the school and to feed into its self-evaluation, and to look at that broader range of evidence as well. But we'll still have to make those inferences in our teaching, and we'll still have to be capturing that information so we know exactly where those learners are. So that information will still exist in the system, but what we're saying is we're not going to be capturing that and looking at that at a local authority or a regional or a national level. And one of the key reasons for that is to ensure that I think perhaps in the past that hasn't always been helpful in terms of the conversation around learning. And supporting learners in terms of their progress. I think the focus has sometimes been too much on the number and not enough on the kind of the sort of teaching and learning strategies and the approaches we need to ensure that our learners improve. Okay, so that would be kind of my response to that.
Darren, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think Councillor Harris did talk about, how will the school know where they are, or will how will governors know where they are?
Yeah, how will the school know where they are? I think that's what I picked up, Darren.
Yeah. I think certainly, I don't think there is, I think it's going to be a continuum, and certainly just because September 2022 the new curriculum is being implemented fully, it's going to be a period of review and ongoing self-evaluation for a number of years as they review the way they're implementing that curriculum. And I think certainly from EAS's point of view, there'll be that professional learning, the development of case studies, sharing of practice. And I think schools will undertake those activities themselves, sharing practice within clusters, across local authorities, across the region. So I think this is going to be significant increase in the amount of collaboration taking place as well between schools as well as they're sharing their practice. And I know certainly within schools within Monmouthshire, the working in hubs during the pandemic really brought schools closer together, staff working in same buildings, and those relationships have continued. Certainly in between January and April, some schools were sharing resources. Staff in year 3 classes across clusters were sharing resources to try and reduce the workloads. And certainly those relationships are ongoing. But also within the school itself, their self-evaluation processes are going to be instrumental in identifying where they are to ensure that consistency across the school. And as the operational guidance allows, how we use that monitoring calendar to allow us to identify the implementation of the teaching, looking at book scrutinies, looking at learning walks. And so certainly schools will have much more first-hand evidence, but so will peer improvement partners from September, though going into schools where they have more evidence to actually support schools and to look at, to be able to identify where the school is, but also what are those next steps for each of those schools. Sharon.
And from the local authorities' point of view, we do meet with schools regularly now to look at what progress they're making. And that's focused and has been for the last few years on their self-evaluation and their school development plan and what their priorities are. So we will have the opportunity to really understand how they're making progress in relation to those priorities, to understand what are the challenges and barriers and how we can help them overcome that, but also to celebrate the progress they've made and have a view then about whether that, how that progress is in relation to other schools. But essentially, this is a very bespoke way of supporting schools and giving assurance to the school community about the progress the school is making in relation to what really is important to them and that reflects their context and their learners.
Okay. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks for that. And thanks, Darren, and for your input there. Councillor Grocott, you got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask a couple of questions around the actual implementation of the new curriculum. I think it has profound repercussions for the primary school in my own ward, which may well be closed under reorganisation proposals. And so I'm particularly thinking about the youngest children in the primary age range. James, you in your presentation, you made it quite clear that the new Welsh curriculum will stretch from 3 to 16, and you said there would be one 3 to 16 continuum of learning. And I know that for 3-year-olds, much of that provision is currently provided by the private sector, and I know my own grandchildren have benefited from that themselves. I also know that in the UK that's quite unusual, and my 3-year-old grandchild in Germany is very happily going through part of their national curriculum in kindergarten, which I think is much more the norm in other countries in Europe. However, in Derry View, which is the primary school in my ward, we're currently in the position where members of staff of the school are providing for 3-year-olds and working towards the introduction of the new Welsh curriculum for 3-year-olds. The difficulty is that the local authority in Monmouthshire is currently consulting on a document to open a new all-through school from the age of 4. And the 3-year-old bit would be provided by a private contractor within the grounds, within the site of the new all-through 4 to 19 school. Now, the whole rationale that was brought to this committee and brought to the county council was for a 3 to 19 all-through school. My question, I think, to Sharon is when was that age range in the consultation changed? and who was consulted when that 3 to 19 that we were told about is now a 4 to 19. And a question, perhaps unusually to you, Chair. I believe that the consultation will be on the agenda for our next CYP, because I asked that it could be considered. I wonder if you, and working with the scrutiny manager, could ensure that this very specific issue of who provides the first year of this new Welsh curriculum, who will deliver that within the new school? Because we were told as members by officers that the purpose, one of the purposes of having a 3 to 19 school was to have one continuum of provision, and that this would help to break a cycle of poverty and a history of educational underachievement and low life expectation within the ward that I represent and that Derry View provides for. So, question to Sharon: when was that decision taken to move the consultation from 3 to 19 to 4 to 19, with its repercussions in terms of maintained provision? And for you, Chair, can we get a guarantee that this will provide a clear focus of the agenda item when we next meet to discuss the outcomes of the current consultation? Thank you.
Sharon, do you want to start?
Councillor Grocott. What I would say is that the consultation document has been issued as a consultation document in as much that that is what it is. It is under consultation. Therefore, the document that has been shared is the one that is the position for the local authority to consult on at this minute in time. I understand that across the site there is provision for 3 to 19, and therefore within that there will, whatever the model is, whatever the model when the decision is made, will still make sure that there is provision from 3 to 19 on that site. So however the early years element is delivered for 3 to 4-year-olds will be determined as a result of the consultation, but it won't change provision from 3 to 19 on that school site.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. For my part as chair, and thanks, Councillor Goker, for that point. I can't preempt what's going to happen in the consultation. My crystal ball is fairly cracked at the moment, and therefore we're going to have to wait to see what how people respond. And obviously there are various rumours flying about, which I wouldn't really want to go into, but undoubtedly that is an issue that we will need to raise in the July the 8th meeting of CYP, and by that time, perhaps Sharon can correct me if I'm wrong, but by that time we will have hard evidence of what people think about the proposal for the new school in Abergavenny, and obviously that's going out to a broad spectrum people. We've already discussed it once at the town council. I have to
In that the chair has frozen, could I come back with a supplementary now rather than wait for the chair to have finished? Yes, I accept that the new school will have 3 to 19 provision, but could you confirm that when you spoke to the governing body at Derry View and to the governing body at King Henry VIII about the new provision, the inference, at least, if not stronger than that, was that the current staff in Derry View who provide the nursery education would be continuing to deliver that nursery education? And what would happen to those staff if they lose that nursery provision within the school curriculum?
Martin, I can come back to say that I'm sorry, I wasn't at the meeting that you're referring to with the governing body, so I can't tell you what the inference was at that particular time. all I can say is that, certainly on the site there will be 3 to 19 provision, and the consultation document is written as it's written for the very purpose of consultation. We know that the matter will be raised on the 8th of July at the next select committee, when our consultation will be completed, so we will know what that feedback is, and also then for members to have an opportunity, members of this committee to have an opportunity to make their feelings known, to feed that back into the consultation as well.
Yeah, could I say, as the chair has frozen, I'd have to take over as vice chair, and I think Sharon Randall-Smith has answered the question, and there's going to be a further discussion in the meeting on the 8th of July. So I think we should actually move on now. I can see Peter Strong's name. I don't know, is that an old hand or is it a new one?
It's a new one there.
Sorry, is it the previous one or not?
No. It's another question, if I can.
Oh, another question. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Well, two
yeah,
quick
I'm back this time, I think.
Okay, you can take over now, Tudor.
Can I carry on? Yeah. Okay. Two, please. Firstly, there's been a bit of a Twitter and Facebook storm with people claiming that Welsh history is not compulsory in the new curriculum. Can you just quickly reassure us that it is compulsory, and a little bit on what form you envisage it taking? And then secondly, in your slide about qualifications, it referred to a bigger Welsh GCSE. Can you just elaborate on what you understand by that?
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Peter. Yeah. So I'm sorry about the breaking connection, but I'm actually back now, I think. Sorry about that. Nothing to do with me. I am paying the meter.
Yeah, okay, so let me pick up the Welsh history question first. I'll send everyone the link as agreed to the consultation document. As part of the bill achieving its passage through the Senedd, there was a requirement to strengthen the position of Welsh history in the curriculum. So that will now be come through more strongly within the statements of what matters, which, as I mentioned earlier, are going to be a mandatory part of the framework. Now, in terms of the detail of that, the group that are working on that are going to do so through the summer term. So that will become evident then beyond that point. But I know that was something that was raised during the period of the passage of the bill, and something that now Welsh Government have responded to, and we expect to see as part of that refresh of the curriculum framework. So I don't have any more detail than that on that particular question. In terms of the Welsh GCSE, it was the proposal, and it is a proposal again, so it's gone out for consultation, so we'll have to see what the sector comes back with. But the proposal was to strengthen the Welsh GCSE by having a 1.5 equivalent GCSE, whereas currently it's one GCSE equivalent. So that was the proposal, yeah. And as I said, we'll see what the wider system says, what the feedback is, and then obviously Qualifications Wales will need to respond to what the sector is saying. Okay,
thanks for that.
No problem.
Okay.
The concern, if I can just quickly come out, the concern about a 1.5 GCSE is that going to squeeze out something else, which would seem to be a bit of a worry. But we'll have to look at that when the details come out.
Absolutely, and all I would say on that, Councillor Strong, is the fact that other GCSEs are adapting and changing too. So it's 1.5 in maths, whereas most study 2 now. It's 1.5 in English, whereas most study 2. So what we'd have to do is look at the whole consultation. That will then determine in terms of curriculum time. So, but as I said, it is a consultation. So I suppose having another look at autumn when we get the findings from that will be helpful.
Okay, thank you. And you just promoted me to the rank of councillor.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Take that as a demotion, Peter.
I agree.
Hand up from Councillor Louise Brown, and can we keep it to sort of succinct questions now, please?
Yes, it is a succinct question. It's just about what the skills certificate involves, and I think I mentioned it before, and sort of what level of qualification is it? Because it's something new that I haven't actually heard about. And Chair, I think Councillor Lane put a question in the chat bar as well. I don't know whether he wants to raise that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll come to that.
Okay, I think the answer to the question for Councillor Brown was around the Skills Challenge Certificate, which is effectively what the Welsh Baccalaureate has previously been known as is. So that is currently in its current format, but it will be reformed. It has the 4 elements. It has an individual project, it has the enterprise challenge, it has a community challenge, and it has a global citizenship aspect to it. That's the current qualification. It's equivalent, so it's a level 2 equivalent qualification at the moment, so equivalent to a GCSE, and there's also a level 3 pathway then at A level as well. But I also mentioned, so it could also be to do with the fact that there is going to be some additional skills qualifications in some of the other areas. The detail on that isn't clear yet, but that will also come through the consultation process.
Could I just come back, Chair? Yeah, is there any chance of, because the curriculum now covers sort of the careers side, is there any chance of it including sort of skills in CVs and interviews and things like that? Because I think often it's something that isn't taught at school, and then people have difficulty then getting jobs because they don't, they haven't had that sort of training, and I think that would be very useful. Thank you.
Within the curriculum framework, there is scope for schools to do that, certainly. But as I've said, there's less that's prescribed within this curriculum to give that flexibility. So, that there will be an element of choice there for schools.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. I've seen a question in the chat bar. Councillor Lane, do you want to come in? But can I say one in the chat bar, because that is not in as a councillor. You must put your hand up, because then that will be public. The chat bar is only between members. So, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask the question, splendid presentation by James, Darren and Sharon, but thank you so much for that. But in terms of the Wellbeing Act, how much resource will be available for the pastoral care, those people who may need continued support? That's what I want to ask. Thank you.
Chair, I'm happy to come in here. I think certainly, Councillor Lane, there will be a continuation of funding from Welsh Government through the Accelerated Learning Plan funding and other funding such as the PDG, Pupil Deprivation Grant funding, which will go on to support programmes of intervention for pupils who require that support going on. But certainly, I think across Monmouthshire as well, there's been a significant amount of professional learning, and schools now have practitioners within schools who are better able to support pupils as well by developing that capacity within schools. A number of schools have got increased practitioners in ELSA support, Thrive support. So those pupils who require that support, there are more practitioners on the ground within schools across Monmouthshire to supply that support. And I think going forward as well, under the new curriculum, the health and well-being area of learning is something which really puts it at the heart of school life, and well-being has never had such a big focus within school, and schools have never been so aware of those well-being issues, not just of pupils and learners within the school, but also of staff. So certainly something that the last 16 months has really highlighted for us within schools and the school system is the support required for learners and staff across schools within Monmouthshire and across the region as well. So certainly it is a focus. It was a focus previously, but I think there's more significant focus going forward for that well-being. And the Welsh Government are funding schools through different grants to support that as well. And that funding it will be ongoing.
Thank you, Darren. That's a very comprehensive answer. I appreciate that. Thank you.
the new curriculum, that presentation that we've just gone through. We've had quite a number. I can't see any other hands up. I mean, first and foremost, I obviously like to but then picking up all the questions, and to Sharon Randall-Smith as well for answering those questions. It is, as I said in the earlier part, it is a sea change, isn't it, in terms of schools, in terms of teachers, pupils, head teachers, but also there's a huge job to be done in terms of parents, in terms of letting people know, you know, change. And we've had wide-ranging questions on looking back at some of the questions, the sort of the issue of continuum and of being in a strong position. And obviously COVID has had some effect on that, but in one way, COVID has had quite a positive effect in terms of teachers, to be fair to them, adapting so quickly to dealing with blended learning, being in school, not being in school. And in reality, probably some changes have come about in time frame which wouldn't have come about time frame if we were in normal circumstances. So in one way, COVID has helped in a enthusiasm for them, but obviously it challenged. Obviously secondary schools are more department-based as opposed to primary schools, were more and some concerns about flexibility from Councillor Brown and are in terms of implementing the new curriculum. It's undoubtedly huge effect. And obviously the question from Councillor Groker about a particular which is in his ward, on this issue of 3 to 60, 3 to 19 or 3 or 4 to 19. Those we will obviously pick up when we have the July the 8th meeting and discuss those fully. Time is dropping quite a lot. Apologies for that. I'm not quite sure why that is. Certainly we'll discuss the new school provision in Abergavenny on July the 18th, which I've been with scrutiny as well.
Louise, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Chair, but you've frozen again. Would it be better if you left the meeting and came back in again? Would you like us to wait a few minutes while you did that?
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor. I'll do.
Yeah, if you come back, you did improve when you came back in again before.
You're muted, Tudor.
You're on mute, Councillor Tudor.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Thomas, I mean.
Okay, right. I'll try. While my signal is. If I cut out managing discussion there on the new curriculum, but we will obviously be calling on EAS to come back to report again, I'm sure, as the system as the new curriculum progresses. But once again, thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr. A very clear presentation, and obviously, you know, we really appreciate that. We'll move on now then. So thank you both, Darren and James and Sharon. We'll move on now then to the Children and Young People Forward Work Planner. And obviously the next item that we're going to look at on July the 8th is going to be the development of the new school in Abergavenny, and obviously that will be, I would think, quite a long, detailed meeting, because there are a number of issues, but predominantly about the 3 to 16 issue. The next item on the agenda, the Council and Cabinet Work Plan. Obviously, that is purely for information. And then 9, the...
sorry, Chair, could we come in on the Forward Work Programme, please?
Yes, sorry, right.
We did have a discussion pre-meeting on that. Don't know whether Councillor Edwards wants to come in on it. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I know we briefly mentioned earlier on about putting the 21st century schools back on the agenda for one of the available meetings later on this year, if that was entirely possible. Obviously, the next meeting is very busy, and I'm sure every single agenda for all the planned meetings are very busy, but there are sort of available meetings from October, so I wonder whether we could ask the MCC officers to look into that, so we can talk more about the 21st century schools and what's left to do going forward.
Okay, yes, thanks for that, Councillor Edwards. I'm more than happy to discuss that with the scrutiny officer, and we will look to bring that onto the agenda. The last school, obviously, Chepstow is the only one that hasn't been developed, probably in reasonably full up now, as it were, till the end of this summer term. But I'm more likely a scrutiny officer. So thanks for making that point. As I say, its work plan is there for information. Next item.
I wonder if I should take over, Tudor, because your reception keeps disappearing.
That would be a good idea, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, okay. So I think we were about to look at the Council and Cabinet report, but I'm not sure if there's any comments on that. Is there anything that needs to be raised there, Hazel?
No, it's for information, members, so that you can see the decisions that are going forward to Cabinet and make sure that there's ample opportunity for you to bring something forward for scrutiny. So if you've looked at that and there's nothing that you want to identify, then it's for information.
Right, I can only see one hand raised, but I think that's a previous hand, isn't it? Shall we go? I think the last item is just the minutes, and could I have it proposed and seconded, please?
Yes, I'll propose them, Louise Martin Croquet.
Yeah,
and I'll second it, Maureen.
Yeah, I think that's the end of the meeting. And
can I just come in for a second?
Sorry, yes, was there something else, Councillor Edwards?
Just the one issue. Looking at the minutes, obviously I wasn't part of that meeting. This is my first meeting on the committee, but it does mention the Chief Officer, Will McLean, providing some kind of update to a future meeting. Now, I appreciate that the next meeting in July discussing the new school in Abergavenny is going to be extremely busy, but I thought it might be a good opportunity, being the last meeting of the term as well, for Will McLean to come in and provide an update. It mentions in the minutes that it's in relation to ongoing support for teachers, pupils catching up after COVID and helping children get back to where they should be regarding their education. And it was suggested that Will would come in and update this committee after he's been out to several schools within Monmouthshire, just to provide us with an update.
Oh, so really, thank you, Councillor Edwards. What you're talking about is really matters arising as a result of the minutes. I think I've got Will McLean's hand up at the moment, so if you'd like to come in and respond to that, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. Apologies for not being with you this morning. I was having my second vaccination, so apologies for that. Yeah, more than happy to do that. I did commit last time that following some visits to schools to reflect back to the committee on how the summer term was going. I think we talked about giving schools the opportunity to see children, for them to settle in, both staff and children, and to return to learning. I think I've visited several of our primary schools. I met with secondary heads this morning, and I'll be visiting our secondaries in the next half term. So it probably would be a good opportunity at that meeting to actually feed back some of the themes that I've seen and heard from head teachers as I've been around the school. So there's no problem at all to do that.
Yeah, sorry, what day meeting would that be? It's not the 8th, is it? Would it be after that?
In terms of meeting dates, in terms of the, and I've obviously, I've seen from the chat today that there are some ongoing discussions around the King Henry development. That item could be a long item. It could be a shorter item, I guess. I don't necessarily think that we should preclude other items on that day, and I'd be happy to give it on the 8th of July if that would be.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful if to the committee. I think we've finished the agenda now, and I'd just like to say thank you very much, and I'm sorry that the chairs had connection problems, and thank you very much to the presenters and to the officers concerned. So we'll close the meeting now, and thank you for all the participants. Thank you.